Hello there, I'm Steve from Mac84, and welcome to a very special video. This video is the first part in a series about the history of Macintosh clones. Let me start by saying I've done extensive research over the years for this video series. However, some information was difficult to confirm, and some details seem to conflict with others. So this video represents what I believe is an accurate look at these events. Please see the link in my blog that is linked below in the video description text box for additional details, possible corrections, and resources. And if I missed something cool, let me know in the comments section. So finally, it's time to discuss this dark era in Apple's history, a time when Apple was unfocused, losing market share, and just barely scraping by. But you may be asking, what is a Macintosh clone? Well, today the only way to run the Mac OS officially and legally is to buy a Mac from Apple. But for a brief period in the mid-1990s, Apple officially licensed the Macintosh operating system to third-party computer and electronic manufacturers so they could make and sell their own Macintosh-compatible computers. So, Apple sold their own Macs, and other companies like Power Computing, UMax, and Motorola made agreements with Apple to sell their own Macs. These third-party Macintoshes were dubbed Macintosh clones. This was an attempt by Apple to grow sales of the Mac and expand its market share among personal computers. This licensing strategy is of course similar to the way that Microsoft licenses its Windows operating system to third-party PC manufacturers today. You may have heard about Macintosh clones before, but you likely haven't heard the entire story. It's not as simple as it may seem on the surface. The full story is ripe with missed opportunities, failed corporate alliances, and inflated egos. So it is my absolute pleasure to present to you in this series the full story, the rise and fall of the Macintosh clones. To fully understand how and why Apple got into this troubled spot of licensing the Mac OS in the mid-1990s, we have to go back even further, way back to the beginning of the Macintosh. In the early 1980s, Apple was still enjoying the success of their Apple II line of personal computers. But after some rocky years and failed product launches, they put all of their focus on a new personal computer designed for the rest of us. When the original Macintosh was introduced in January of 1984, it was truly a platform of its own. Besides the friendly design, the unique mouse, and the crisp monitor, the Macintosh operating system was really where the magic happened. The Macintosh system software and Finder, which would eventually be called the Mac OS, was what made the Macintosh simple to learn, easy to master, and revolutionary in the history of personal computers. And although the Macintosh saw modest success upon its release, by 1985 sales started to slow down. To make matters worse, a lot of the superstars of the original Macintosh development and engineering team were leaving Apple in droves. Most of them were burnt out after pushing themselves to ship the original Macintosh on time. Others became depressed at the lack of blockbuster success that they had come to expect from the Macintosh. The idea of going back to work to fix and build an improved second Macintosh model was just too much for some of them. A lot of factors contributed to the slow sales of the Macintosh. One was its price. The original Macintosh was expensive and sold for $2,495 US. And that's $500 more than Apple's previous targeted price, and about $6,000 US when adjusted for inflation today. Not a purchase most people could easily justify. Other issues stemmed from technical shortcomings. The original Macintosh shipped with 128 kilobytes of system memory, and unlike other computers of the time, this memory was not upgradable. Most enthusiasts saw this as a foolish decision. To worsen this, the sophisticated bitmap graphics of the Macintosh software required a lot of memory to work, leaving little memory left over for running programs. Most users were accustomed to having multiple floppy disk drives on their Apple II or their other 8-bit computer systems. However, the Macintosh only had one floppy disk drive. Even with an increased disk space of 400K per disk, having only one disk drive on the Mac required an endless loop of swapping and shuffling system disks, program disks, and data disks. Thankfully, about 5 months after the release of the Mac, Apple would offer an external 400K floppy disk drive to double your storage capacity, but it cost an extra $400. Another concern was a lack of software available for this expensive new Macintosh computer. Even though software developers were excited about the new Mac platform, they needed to dedicate a lot of time and resources to learn how to make Mac programs. Apple didn't even provide a native code compiler, and in the early days you needed an Apple Lisa 2 computer to develop Mac programs, making this an expensive endeavor even for the most experienced software publishers. Finally, the Macintosh was just too different. Some people just didn't like or understand the mouse. Others criticized the lack of arrow or cursor keys on the keyboard, and some simply didn't see the potential of the Macintosh and dismissed it as simply a toy. Apple would remedy the memory situation by launching the Macintosh 512K in September of 1984. This Fat Mac had 4 times the memory of the earlier 128K models, but also cost 20% more than the original Mac at launch. Early adopters of the Macintosh could have Apple upgrade their original 128K machines to a full 512K, but at a cost of about $1,000. However, for some, this cost was well worth it. The Mac user didn't have to memorize special computer commands, understand programming syntax, or configure startup files. Apple designed the Macintosh to be easily approachable and simple to use. That's why they included an instructional audio cassette alongside the manuals of their Macintosh computer. But the true magic of this innovation was the coupling of the computer hardware with the elegance of the Macintosh system software. Since both the software and hardware were designed and engineered by Apple, everything pretty much just worked. This was a huge selling point to those who had never purchased a computer before, or who were put off by the complexity of other personal computers at the time. Unlike the popular DOS, which could practically run on any compatible hardware by any potential company, you could only use Apple's futuristic Macintosh operating system on Mac hardware, which was only sold by Apple. This was made possible by the Macintosh ROM, a physical chip which contained crucial instructions, data, and other details that allowed the Macintosh operating system to run. Without this ROM, copycat manufacturers couldn't get far in trying to run the Macintosh operating system on non-Apple hardware. Similar to today, Apple made its money by building in a healthy profit margin into the price of their products. Since Apple saw themselves as a hardware company, they didn't want to share the Macintosh operating system with others. But even Steve Wozniak, co-founder of Apple Computer Incorporated, later admitted Apple's thoughts on this matter were a mistake. This didn't sit well with others who were used to the way operating systems like DOS were licensed. Outsiders who saw the potential of the Mac begged Apple to license the operating system to other manufacturers. These calls to license the Mac OS came from someone with some experience in this area, co-founder of Microsoft, Bill Gates. In June of 1985, Bill Gates sent a letter to then Apple Computer CEO John Sculley and the head of Macintosh development, Jean-Louis Gasset. In this letter, Bill tried to convince Apple that in order for the Mac to succeed, the Macintosh needed to become a standard. He openly pledged his genuine support to help Apple in making this a reality. If the Macintosh operating system was made available through licensing, other companies could create computers running Apple's software. This would open the doors to more market share for the Macintosh platform, but of course would eat into Apple's lucrative hardware profits. Apple didn't respond to Bill's letter, which prompted him to send another one the next month. But John Sculley didn't see or understand how this new direction would help Apple, and Gasset refused to hand over the prized Macintosh operating system to its competitors. However, a few months later, likely with Gates' letter still in the back of his mind, Sculley asked Dan Eilers to pitch the idea of licensing the Mac OS to Apple's executives. Dan was the director of strategic investment at Apple. He believed that others would soon copy the user interface of the Mac and that Apple's innovative advantages would slowly erode over time. This would cause Apple's market share to drop, and soon it would be difficult to get developers to make software for the Macintosh at all. So Dan proposed that Apple should immediately start work on porting the Mac OS to Intel-based computers in conjunction with an aggressive strategy to license the Mac OS while it still had some advantage over the competition. Jean-Louis Gasset became enraged. He thought it was impossible to port the Mac OS to Intel and feared that Apple would lose revenue by licensing the Mac OS. Gasset threatened that his engineers would leave if Apple decided to license the Mac OS. Reluctantly, John Sculley gave in, and Dan's dream of licensing was shot down. But years later, Gasset would admit he was wrong about this decision, saying, "I am aware I am known as the Great Satan on licensing. My mistake was I got into a debate that I should have not gotten into. I thought, financially, it didn't make sense. I was never for or against licensing. I just did not see how it would make sense. But my approach was stupid. We were just fat cats living off a business that had no competition." However, around this time, a few early licensing deals came very close to being signed, including one with workstation maker Apollo, but these were pulled away at the last second. So while Microsoft was gaining market share with DOS, Apple remained the only company shipping Macintosh computers running the Macintosh system software. But that didn't stop other companies from testing the waters. After all, Apple had only marginal success in fighting off clones of the Apple II a few years earlier. Besides, how tough could Apple's lawyers really be? The very first Macintosh clone was made by Unitron, a Brazilian company which began their cloning efforts sometime in 1985. There is a wealth of information about Unitron and their unauthorized Mac clone on Giselle's website and this article from the Cult of Mac. I'll give you a summary of this machine, but I really encourage you to check out those links for further details. Adam Rosen from the Cult of Mac writes, Unitron's initial plan was to negotiate a licensing agreement with Apple, but the mothership in Cupertino refused to do this without owning at least 51% of the venture. This kind of agreement was prohibited under Brazilian law, so instead, with the government's assistance, Unitron decided to forge ahead without Apple's blessing. Their Apple II clone was already being sold without any objection from Apple, so this seemed like a realistic option to pursue. And that's right, Unitron wasn't new to cloning. They were one of the first companies to sell an Apple II clone to the Brazilian computer market years earlier. So after being shot down by Apple, they didn't see much of a risk in doing exactly what they did before with Apple's previous computers. After all, an apple is an apple, right? Giselle recalls seeing a preview of Unitron's clones at Brazil's National Computer Fair in 1985. Their booth setup was an elaborate display which caught the public's attention, but it kept them at a distance, likely so they couldn't see that this may have been purely a mock-up. 2 Macintosh-style systems were suspended from the ceiling over a small artificial lake. One of these machines was turned off and partially opened to reveal the insides, which featured different components than that of a real Apple Mac, while the other machine was closed and displayed a software demo on the screen. Some speculate that this was likely a real Apple Mac, as these types of marketing tricks were a popular way to test the public's interest without yet having a final product on hand. But fast forward to a year later, Unitron had obviously been busy. At the 1986 National Computer Fair, Unitron showed off a handful of Mac clones and had them on display for visitors to try out. This unauthorized Mac clone looked practically the same to Apple's real Macintosh, although some versions were produced with 2 internal floppy drives and the keyboard and mouse differed from those that were actually produced and shipped with Apple's computers. But how did this happen? How did they clone the Macintosh without stealing Apple's Macintosh ROM? Well, Unitron claims that they had legitimately reverse-engineered the Macintosh ROM. Therefore, they believed that they were legally allowed to sell their machine. At this time, Brazil was not allowing imports of computers, so all computers sold in their country had to be made in Brazil. The story goes that Apple got wind of this and got a hold of a few of these Unitron clones to check out for themselves. Apple examined the ROM inside of these clones and claimed that the majority of the ROM was copied from a genuine Mac ROM and was not reverse engineered. Unitron denied this, but how else would Apple find a genuine ROM inside of a clone? Well, it is possible that Unitron models that Apple got their hands on were prototypes which had copies of the Mac's ROM for use in engineering and software testing and stuff like that. We may never know the truth of exactly what happened, but we can all guess about what happened next. Apple was furious and saw these Unitron clones as theft of their intellectual property. Apple put pressure on the Brazilian government through the US State Department to stop sales of this Macintosh clone. Unitron did not actually break any Brazilian laws, as Apple had not protected its rights in Brazil. But among increased pressure and threats by the United States, Unitron eventually backed down, and their Macintosh clone project was axed. Around 500 machines had already been produced and were allegedly ready to ship. However, Giselle elaborates on his website that Unitron's Macintosh clone efforts didn't exactly end in 1986. Giselle and the team worked to develop faster Macintosh systems, but although their efforts were promising, Unitron would eventually cancel their Macintosh projects. But a still curious Giselle wondered if Unitron's prototype Turbo Mac clone could compete against Apple's latest machines. At the 1992 National Computer Fair in Brazil, Apple set up a booth showing off their new Macintosh Classic computer. Giselle brought along a floppy disk with a benchmark program on it and decided to do a little test on the Classic. Much to his delight, Unitron's prototype Turbo Mac ran the test 23% faster than Apple's brand new Macintosh Classic. However, Apple wasn't foolish. Even they understood the advantages of having other companies build Macs for them, especially if it was for a limited target audience. Apple had been interested in marketing a portable Macintosh computer to sell to the US government, but it hadn't developed any portable systems it could sell. So instead, Apple did the next best thing and partnered with organizations to help them modify their Macs to get them into the hands of the US government. In 1986, Apple worked with Falcon Microsystems Incorporated and Systematics General Incorporated to build a Tempest Macintosh. The term Tempest is basically military slang for a piece of electronic equipment which has been shielded and modified to meet military specifications and needs. These machines were slated to become available for government use by the fall of 1986. However, even though the Macintosh Plus was released in January of 1986, the Tempest model instead used a Macintosh 512K system, as the designs were agreed upon well before the Plus was introduced. There were plenty of other Tempest-converted Mac systems made by a number of companies, but essentially they all took a civilian machine and brought it up to military code. It would take a lot more than a case swap to make a CRT-based Macintosh a truly portable system. Enter Colby Systems Incorporated. Inventor Chuck Colby, well known for cloning the IBM PC motherboard, was no stranger to electronics. Colby was interested in making his own Mac, but as things stood currently, that wasn't possible without becoming a target of Apple's legal team. Now, Chuck Colby was no stranger to Macintosh conversions. He had previously produced a few Macintosh conversion systems that transformed the 128K and 512K Macs into a luggable and slightly more portable form factor. Colby had used the leftover cases from his previous IBM PC luggables on his Mac Colby luggable computers. Apple co-founder Steve Wozniak was a friend of Chuck Colby and a fan of his inventions. But even befriending Wozniak wouldn't be enough to hold off Apple's lawyers. So Chuck decided to take a more respectful approach. Colby and Apple entered into negotiations in late 1986. Colby had hoped to ship a portable Macintosh sometime around 1987 with an estimated price point of between $5,000 and $7,000 US. Colby wasn't necessarily trying to clone the Macintosh hardware, but he wanted to convert existing genuine Apple hardware into new form factors. Apple would allow Colby to purchase entire Macintosh Plus computers and then convert them to portable Macintosh computers with their own cases, parts, screens, and add-ons. Converting these chunky all-in-one Macintosh computers to a portable form factor was not easy, but if anybody could do it, it would be the team at Colby. The team at Colby worked hard to convert the chunky CRT-filled Macintosh Plus into a portable laptop computer. Their first Lap Mac weighed 15 pounds and featured a gas plasma flat screen monitor. This was technically the very first Mac with a flat screen display. The Lap Mac is huge compared to today's laptops, but this was still much better than lugging around a compact Macintosh, especially since you didn't need to be tethered to an electrical outlet. Colby even converted the leftover 9-inch CRTs from their purchased Macintoshes to external monitors for when you felt like working on a desktop. In fact, this relationship seemed to be beneficial to Apple. It is reported that customers who called up Apple asking for a portable Macintosh were given the phone number to Colby Systems. And Apple likely didn't mind selling a few hundred or thousand Macintosh Plus systems to Colby. After all, a customer is a customer. Colby also produced a Macintosh conversion designed for police, fire, ambulance, and civil defense vehicles. This was exactly the type of Mac the US government may have been interested in buying from Apple. These Colby mobile Macs were tested out by the Redwood City Police Department in California. For about $1,500 US, you got a 7-inch black and white CRT monitor, a portable Mac unit, a 12-volt DC power supply, a keyboard, and a trackball. The mobile Mac itself only weighed about 6.5 pounds, and could easily fit in a briefcase for easy transport. Colby, however, was always moving forward. He would replace his earlier Lap Mac clone with the model he named the Tempest. You can take a guess of what market Colby was trying to sell his machines to, although he would eventually change the name from the Tempest to the Walk Mac. This model had a new design and a far sleeker case that was more polished than its predecessor. The top of the machine had a flat surface that was ideal for using your mouse on. But an external keyboard was still required, as none was built in. This model used a logic board of a Macintosh Plus and featured removable drive systems, including a hard drive unit and a floppy drive unit. Apparently, the military really liked this idea of removable storage for security or destruction purposes. However, this new machine was still quite large, and like the previous Lap Mac, it had no built-in battery. You needed to plug into a heavy external battery pack if you wanted to untether yourself from the electric outlets in your home or business. However, this was more of a portable desktop machine than something that you would want to try and cram on your lap. Others saw Colby and also wanted in on the Macintosh conversion business. Dynamac Computer Products Incorporated and Intelitech Systems Corporation sold their own Macintosh portable systems as well. Each sold for around $5,000 and weighed about 15 or 16 pounds. The MX Plus by Intelitech even offered two 800K floppy disk drives with an optional internal thermal printer. The other conversion makers also offered add-ons like built-in modems, composite TV video outports, and portable inkjet printer options. Colby would dramatically update his bulky BlueMaq in 1988 with the brand new BlueMaq SE. As the name implies, this was a clone of the Macintosh SE and featured many improvements over the bulkier BlueMaq that came before it. And this time the machine had a built-in keyboard and a built-in battery, the first ever for a portable Mac. Although apparently the battery was still an optional upgrade. The BlueMaq SE was a smaller, sleeker civilian machine and looked very similar to many of the DOS laptops that were available at the time. The BlueMaq SE featured a 9-inch backlit LCD that was a huge improvement over the previous gas plasma displays in earlier models. The BlueMaq SE sold for about $5,500 and could be configured with a variety of add-on options. Colby would later follow up this model with the BlueMaq SE30, which contained the logic board of a Macintosh SE30. However, Sony, the makers of the portable cassette player the Walkman, threatened legal action against Chuck Colby because the name BlueMaq sounded too similar to Walkman. Chuck reluctantly changed the name of his machines to simply Colby SE and Colby SE30. But Colby wasn't the only company who desired to make a portable Macintosh. Outbound Systems, based in Boulder, Colorado, thought they too could create a better portable Macintosh. Outbound announced their first model, the Outbound laptop, in August of 1989, with a price tag of around $4,000 US. The Outbound had a few advantages. Although it used a similar Motorola processor as the Macintosh Plus, it ran at almost twice as fast, at nearly 16 MHz. It had space for a built-in hard drive and featured a unique pointing device which they called the IsoPoint trackbar. The Outbound also featured a detachable keyboard which could communicate via wireless infrared, similar to your TV remote control. Of course, the Outbound requires the use of a genuine Macintosh ROM, which must be transplanted from either a Macintosh Plus or Macintosh SE. However, this is where Outbound was really unique. Instead of stealing the ROMs from your Mac and fully lobotomizing it and leaving it as an expensive paperweight, Outbound offered a dealer installable card in your compact Mac, which allowed you to plug your Outbound laptop into your compact Mac via a special cable. When these systems were docked via this cable, the compact Mac used the Macintosh ROM on the Outbound laptop. In addition, Outbound's faster processor was utilized while docked, along with its own enhanced memory, hard disk, and optional 1.4 MB floppy disk drive, making this compact Mac combination quicker than anything Apple was offering at the time. This setup also let you combine your compact Mac CRT display and your Outbound's LCD display into one large virtual workspace. However, just weeks after Outbound announced their portable, Apple finally released their own portable, the Macintosh Portable. Introduced in September of 1989, the Macintosh Portable was Apple's answer to a portable Mac. But their machine was very expensive and didn't seem to be much of a threat to the existing conversion businesses, as Colby and Outbound's products were far cheaper, smaller, and faster than Apple's own offerings. Outbound did have a brief legal exchange with Apple, but this ended in a positive way, with Outbound striking a deal with Apple in the summer of 1990. As part of this deal, Outbound could continue to build their clones, which could use the Macintosh ROM, but customers had to obtain these Mac ROMs themselves. In exchange, Apple apparently paid Outbound $3 million for their docking technology it had developed. Apple had hoped to potentially incorporate this docking technology into their future products. The sluggish, low-power processor in Apple's Macintosh Portable did nothing to help with its poor sales. Not to mention the huge price tag, with models starting at $6,500 US or $7,300 US for a model with a hard drive. Colby and Outbound are partly responsible for the slow sales of the Portable because they provided Apple with some healthy competition. But Apple, of course, knew about these models years before their own Macintosh Portable was released, and yet they still pushed forward with a machine that simply couldn't compete. Apple would try to remain relevant and refreshed their Macintosh Portable model with the backlight screen in February of 1991. But it was a modest update, and most still preferred the much smaller footprint and cheaper prices of Colby and Outbound's offerings. But it wasn't all about portability. In late 1988, a Taiwanese company, Accord Technology, produced a semi-compatible Macintosh clone for around $1,000 with the caveat that you needed to provide your own Macintosh ROM to get it to work. However, later in 1989, Accord showed off a more ambitious project, the Jonathan. This was a clone of the Macintosh Plus, but instead of an all-in-one form factor, it was a screenless desktop machine. But what made it really special is that Accord insisted that they had built their own clone of the Macintosh ROM in a clean room environment. If this claim was true, Apple would find it hard to legally stop the sale of Accord's Mac clone. The form factor of Accord's machine was compact, sleek, and quite attractive. The front of the machine features an 800K floppy disk drive on the left and a hard drive hidden behind the case on the right. The rear shows off an array of ports, including the addition of a Centronics printer or parallel port in addition to the standard Macintosh SCSI port. The back also features a set of unique mouse and keyboard ports, an external floppy disk drive port, 2 modem/serial ports, as well as 2 built-in local talk ports, and finally, a video out port. Apple didn't believe Accord and claimed it was impossible to clone the Macintosh ROM legally. The Jonathan was expected to be submitted for FCC certification, but due to legal pressure by Apple, the company quickly scrapped their plans and Accord's Jonathan clone was never fully released. Although it seems a few of these units still got out there, which is really something cool to look at. Another company called Powderblue started shipping Macintosh clones based on Apple's Macintosh 2 and 2X desktop computers. The company sourced ROMs from several sources, mostly from surplus sellers. They named their computer line BlueMaq, which had 2 models available. Their first model was a low-end 6800 desktop, with their second model being a higher-end 68030 desktop, which included a 14-inch monitor in their price point. These systems ranged from around $4,400 to $7,500 respectively. Now, I couldn't find out much about these systems, so I'm assuming not many of them got out into the wild, if at all. All this cloning business wasn't sitting too well for Apple. So in April of 1989, Apple introduced a new clause in their authorized Macintosh dealer contracts. This clause strictly prohibits dealers from using Apple's replacement parts for purposes other than serving Apple products. This was, of course, in an effort to discourage companies like Accord Technologies and Powderblue from buying Macintosh ROMs from Apple and then using them in their own Mac clone computers. By August 1991, Colby was at it again and planned to debut a substantially lighter portable Mac weighing in at under 5 pounds. This time it was based on the Macintosh Classic, and this time it was in the form factor of a tablet. This tablet was shown off at the August 1991 Macworld Expo in Boston and featured a membrane keyboard and optional touchscreen input device. However, Apple had been patiently developing their own successor to the Macintosh Portable behind the scenes. In October 1991, Apple introduced a truly portable Macintosh with their Powerbook laptop series of personal computers. The Powerbook 100, 140, and 170 models offered processing speeds from 16 MHz to 25 MHz. These new PowerBooks from Apple featured a comfortable yet compact keyboard and mini trackball pointing device to replace the mouse. Most importantly, these PowerBooks were much smaller and lighter than the previous Macintosh Portable, weighing in at only 5 pounds. These PowerBooks were also priced aggressively, with the 100 model being sold for only $2,500, the 140 model selling for about $2,900, and the highest end 170 selling for around $4,600. Sure, the low-end model PowerBook required you to spend an extra $200 for an external floppy disk drive, and all but the highest-end PowerBook shipped with a passive matrix LCD. But this was a welcome compromise from the slow performance and heavy luggable form factor of Apple's Macintosh Portable. The release of the PowerBook at such low prices marked the end of the line for these portable Macintosh conversion companies. They simply couldn't remain profitable. Colby never shipped their classmate Macintosh tablet that they showed off at the Macworld Expo previously, and they soon exited the Macintosh conversion business altogether. Outbound produced one last machine called the Outbound Notebook. It debuted shortly after Apple's Powerbook was shown off, and although it offered a few technological advantages, it wasn't enough to keep the Outbound company afloat. The Outbound Notebook's processor, memory, Mac ROM, and optional FPU were mounted on a clever removable daughterboard card. This made it easy to swap out parts and upgrade the machine in the future. It used the ROMs of a Macintosh Plus or Macintosh SE, but it could be configured with a 20, 25, or 33 MHz 6800 CPU, and higher-end models could even be equipped with a blazing fast 40 MHz 68030 processor. However, now that Apple was making slimmer and more affordable portables, Outbound couldn't afford to compete and would go out of business in December of 1992. But although the Powerbook proved to be a successful and sought-after product for Apple, it couldn't carry the weight of the entire company. Even though sales at Apple Computer were rising, their profits weren't. In order to boost sales, Apple CEO John Sculley focused on increasing the volume of computers sold rather than the high profit margins that Apple was used to. So although Apple sold 60% more products in 1991 than it did in 1990, Apple's profit margin decreased by 11%. To help make up for this decrease, Apple laid off 1,500 of their employees. Things were looking bad for Apple, but hope would soon emerge from out of the blue. Would this come too little too late, or would their risk pay off? Thank you so much for taking a trip back in time with me to look at these early Macintosh clones. We still have a lot to cover in this video series, and we'll be looking at all of this sometime soon. So please subscribe to the channel if you have not done so already. If you can't wait to see some PowerPC clones, please jump over to RMC The Cave on YouTube and check out Neil's latest video. In the video, Neil shows off his collection of Mac clones, and then I have a guest segment where I show off my models as well. So give a subscribe to RMC and be sure to check that video out. If you want to see these videos early, you can subscribe to my Patreon. For as little as $1 a month, you get exclusive access to early videos before they get released anywhere else, and behind the scenes goodies you just can't access otherwise. So be sure to check that out, and you could also follow me on Twitter and Instagram. My handle is Mac84TV. But that's it for now. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you here next time on Mac84.